I think it's really easy as a songwriter to spend so much time and effort on the chorus and to overvalue the chorus so much so that we actually somewhat abandon the verses or don't put the time that's necessary into making the verses great as well. So in this video, we're going to talk about 3 verse mistakes that can ruin your song. One verse mistake that's super common is mistaking the idea of having low energy in the verses for being not interesting in the verses. So it is true that usually our verses should be relative to the rest of the song fairly low energy, because really, in order for there to be energetic peaks, there needs to be valleys. Without valleys, there can be no peaks. So our chorus is usually going to represent the peaks of the energy in our song. And oftentimes the bridge is also another type of peak in the energy of our song. So the verses usually are going to be the low point energy-wise. But that does not mean that we shouldn't still make our verses interesting, because intrigue and interest and energy are 2 totally separate things. So in your verses, even though they might be more restrained, especially with energy levels, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have interesting parts. So I like to think of this as usually there's going to be fewer parts in our verses, like it might be just you singing with a piano part or a guitar part, but that doesn't mean we can't make those parts interesting and intricate. So very often something that I like to do is usually where I will have a piano riff or a piano hook is very often going to be in the verses. In the chorus, it really doesn't need it because that's where all the power chords are coming in and all the different synths and strings maybe to sort of create that big, epic, grandiose chorus that's high in energy. But in the verses, that's really the time to take just a couple instruments and have more interesting parts that maybe aren't super high in energy, but they're still something that catches somebody's ear. And along with this, very often people also tend to have more boring melodies in the verses. And again, yes, it should be lower energy, and usually you want the pitch range that you're using in the verses to be lower than in the choruses, but that doesn't mean the melody should be boring. It doesn't mean you can't still have interesting intervals, even though, again, admittedly, in the chorus, you're probably going to have higher energy levels, which in the form of a vocal melody very often means just a higher pitch range. Another mistake that can ruin your song is having a second or third verse that doesn't advance the story or at least give new information. So this is a bit reductionist, but generally speaking, our normal song structure of verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, you could say follows the general idea of the chorus is generally going to be handling thematic elements and not really very story driven. And then you have your first verse as sort of the first act of the story, your second verse as the second act of the story, and your bridge wraps up that third act. Or if you want to see it a different way, you could see it as sort of a trilogy where you have the first verse, second verse, and bridge as the 3 parts of the trilogy. So I think it's helpful to think through the song structure like this just because it forces you to advance the story when it's so common, especially in the second verse, for people to sort of just repaint what they said in the first verse with different words. We don't want to give the same information that people already know in the second verse. Then you sort of get that sequel movie that is the exact same movie as the first movie. It just has a different generic bad guy, but the plot is basically the same. Everything's the same. It's just a little bit worse. That's usually what happens to second verses, especially if we're not actively trying to make sure that they advance the story, or if it's not really a story-driven song, to at least give new information that we didn't know in the first verse. As a general rule of thumb, you should make sure that every section of the song that you're writing has a purpose. And no, a purpose is not, well, every song has a second verse, so this song should too. That's not a good purpose. We want to make sure that every single part of our song is accomplishing something, it's doing something, and it's there for a reason, and a reason that is story-driven or song-driven in the sense that it should be something that is there because the song demands it be there, not because there happens to be some song structures that are fairly standard out there and we want to rigidly adhere to them. So thinking simply about this, every single verse should up the ante and up the tension of the song. What it shouldn't do is result in people rolling their eyes and saying, okay, I already heard this, but you worded it better the first time, so I'm going to turn it off. Another verse mistake that people can often make is a verse just overstaying its welcome. We all have had that scenario where you have people over to your house or your apartment, and you have a good time, you're having a great time, but then at some point, whether it's because you're an introvert, whether it's because you have to get up the next morning, whatever reason it is, you kind of just hit that wall where you're like, I'm ready for this visit to be over. But the problem is that it's other people in your house. So you can't just leave because it's your house. So you just kind of have to hope that they're going to read the vibe of like, hey, I think they're done hanging out now. And then hope that they're going to leave when they sense that. And then it just sort of gets awkward and it kind of ruins your time. And then it might even be that even though the last hour was the only part that was kind of awkward and wasn't really that fun anymore, it might sort of make the whole event seem like it wasn't really worth your time, or you might end up just seeing it in a more dismal light just because the final hour or so was awkward, even though maybe the other 4 hours were a lot of fun. We don't want to do this with our verses. We don't want to have verses that are so long that even though it was good at first, we bore our listeners to tears before they even get to the chorus. So we want to make sure that our verses also don't overstay their welcome. And really, there's just two simple parts to this. One is to make sure it's just not too long. And then also we want the verses to build and to sort of up the ante. We want to be giving new information that sort of raises the tension so that the verses don't get boring, so that it doesn't feel like we're just repeating the same thing in different words or doing anything else that really just makes it so the listener will start to tune out. But the most common thing here is for people to have verses that are just too long. Now, I am not somebody that subscribes to the idea of like, you have to hit the chorus in the first 30 seconds because that's what people want to hear. Like, I don't think you need to do that. But if you're still not getting to the chorus and you're over a minute in, maybe your verses are a bit too long. So hopefully this was helpful to you. And if it was, something else you'll probably find helpful is my free guide on 10 different ways to start writing a song. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or a beginner, there should be something in this guide for you because it's really built to be something that you can keep coming back to and trying different ways to start a song. That way you don't get stuck in a creative rut, because what I've often found is when I get into creative ruts, it's usually because I tried to start a song in the same way every time. Now, maybe that might be that every time I was starting to write a song, I grabbed my guitar and started with a chord progression. And then soon, after maybe a month of doing that, I found myself just creatively dry. And really the reason that I isn't because I ran out of creativity, it was because I kept going to the same tool over and over again, and I kept trying to start a song in the same exact way. So I might just go to the piano instead, and all of a sudden my creativity is back. I might try to write a bass line first instead, and my creativity is back, or maybe a drum line, or maybe I start with a lyrical concept first, or I go search out interesting words and try to come up with an interesting symbol that really resonates with me, and then I say, I'd like to write a song off of this concept. It's kind of cool. So starting songs in different ways is a great way to keep your creativity fresh, and it's a great way to start out with songwriting, because when you're starting out, you want a bunch of different options of how to start a song so that you can figure out what might work best for you. So in this guide, I give 5 ways from a lyrical standpoint and 5 ways from a musical standpoint, so you can test out whether you prefer writing lyrics first or music first, and different methodologies within both of those, because I think it's worth trying both. I used to be religiously lyrics first. Now I'm more music first. I think they both can work, and I think that they both offer different pluses and minuses. So be sure to try them both. Check it out. Free, link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.